I'm trying to connect now.
Unable to connect. If you have an internet connection, go fuck yourself, because it doesn't matter. Salvete discipuli, it's me again, Miles Crisp, with the 13th episode of Divergent History. It's the 19th of July, 2013. Alright, part 1. As I had said during the beginning of the last week's show, I plan to, have one original lecture per month. I'm going to reiterate that because it got rather broken up with the discussion with Mr. Simpson last time, which was cool, but this is going to be more prescripted. Anyway, it'll be on the first Friday of every month, these long lecture shows that I'm talking about. So the first Friday of every month. And sometimes it might not be if something comes up. I'm going to still leave myself an out, but I'm aiming for the first Friday of every month to have a very long show. All right, not long in time, but it's going to be a very detailed, concise lecture. Frankly, it'll be boring as hell. But the shows after that during the month will be explaining it. The topics will be, as they always have been, very eclectic and about whatever makes humans tick. And for those who don't know, the word eclectic is a combination of things that are very different. Sort of like if you decided to have pickles and raspberry ice cream or something like that, that would be very eclectic and prone only to a pregnant woman or crazy person. Now, at the top of the month, these shows will be divided into 4 parts, roughly 30 minutes each. The first 3 will be about whatever topic or topics, like I said, whatever eclectic hodgepodge of stuff I've decided to lecture about. And the last 30 minutes will be for explaining somebody's question or questions. Anybody that has something that they would like researched or something like that that falls into some general broad category that I might be able and interested and willing to do, I'd be happy to do, and the last 30 minutes would be devoted to that. Tonight's show is just going to be a talk, as I'm doing right now. There's a bit of a difference between talking about stuff and talking and teaching precisely on specific topics, breaking them down and so on. Lots of detail, in other words. I'm not giving you that much detail tonight. Now, it would be nice if I actually had somebody knowledgeable to talk with about such things, don't you think? Like having a sodding guest on once in a while. Well, I'm planning on doing that, and I'm presently taking steps to procure such guests. Mr. James Swagger, the Irish engineer who's been studying firsthand ancient Old World megaliths, as well as New World megaliths, although to a lesser extent, should be on next Friday, the 26th of July. I'm not certain what exactly we'll be talking about yet, but basically I can assure you that it'll be good. And it'll be my first interview, so although I plan to chat with him, more so than interview him, I think it would be more fun to have 2 people of similar obscure interest talking about such things as the potential psychotropic effects of sound waves and resonance chambers that date back to 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 BC. They've got them on Malta. They've got them in various islands around the Mediterranean. There's some in Africa. There's many in Europe. He would be better able to further espouse such things and describe them in better detail. Honestly, I haven't actually read any of his books, and I just came upon him on the fly when I had called Paul one time, just out of the blue, and he happened to be on. I didn't know him from Adam, and I, started getting flamboyant, and then I realized, oh, crap, he actually knows what the hell he's talking about. This has happened to me twice before in my life. So it'll be great to have on, and hopefully he's able to follow through with that next Friday. And I'm going to start petitioning more seriously to have Mr. Jim Vieira on the show. He's an American researcher who's had his TEDx talk taken down. It might have been a TED Talk, TEDx, I don't remember. But anyway, he had it taken down because he's talking about giants in North America and which are documented archaeologically. It's It's really weird, frankly. There's an obvious cover-up from the Smithsonian, which shouldn't be news to anybody that's ever been studying anything about North American natives. They don't like the idea of brown people having invented things white people at the time hadn't figured out yet. That's pretty much the long and short of it, and you can go from there and everything will make a lot more sense if you bear that in mind. So you have an arch, stone arch. You know what's a big deal about an arch? You have the keystone. You guys know how an arch works. You have a keystone so that, without that keystone, the whole thing would just fall in on itself. But because it's there, it distributes the weight out and down the two columns of the arch from what you can think of as being the roof. Well, there's I guess you'd call it a cist burial or a burial chamber somewhere in New England. I don't remember where you see an ashlar stone construction, which means just stone blocks cut to size and put together on basically you're just stacking blocks of stone together with no mortar. And they have this structure that I think is something like 20 feet wide and 40 feet long. And the whole thing is an arch, and it's about 10 or 20 feet underground. The Smithsonian says that it's a root cellar constructed by English settlers sometime in the 17th century, which is absurd. I mean, they weren't building things like that. Anyway, he would be great to have on the show sometime. And eventually, I'd like to have Graham Hancock and Dr. Robert Schock and John Anthony West on, but that'll be in due time. Frankly, I haven't studied thoroughly enough their work, I think enough to warrant their time. That's my opinion. Others are, of course, free to disagree, but I know enough to know that I don't know enough to interview people of that caliber yet. I would... when I'm listening to an interview with people that, I've listened to several interviews from those three, and half the time, or 3/5 of, I'm just going to say about 85-90% of the time, they get asked the same dozen or so questions. I don't want to do that. I want to talk about, things that people would probably never have even, you're not going to know what the hell we're talking about unless you've read the book. Well, yeah, it's a limited audience, but how many interviews are there out there that rely on having pre-existing knowledge enough with the interviewee to... Anyway, I think it's a lot more insightful that way. So, for today's sermon, I'm going to rehash what I'm going to probably rehash on every show. 195,000 years ago, out of Homo Kibish in Ethiopia, earliest anatomically modern Homo sapiens. That's us. 50 to 60,000 years ago, we managed to sail to Australia without being able to see it from what's essentially Indonesia and Papua New Guinea before we bothered to sail out there. 30 to 40,000 years ago, we became what they call behaviorally modern, which means we started painting shit on caves. That's proof that we were thinking abstractly. Because apparently you don't have to be thinking abstractly in order to pick up shop and sail to another continent you didn't know was there yet. Between 10,000 BC and 6,000 BC, so that would be 12,000 to 8,000 years ago, most of our old world domesticated crops and animals came into being around the Fertile Crescent. That's along the Zagros Mountains, southern Turkey, and coming in a crescent shape down southwesterly towards the Levant and Israel. So basically between Iran and Israel. Anyway, it was also things independently domesticated in China, I think. In other cases, it was spread outward from the bulk of the continent of Asia. All the things you think of growing on a farm, except New World crops, came from this region. But in either case, it spread out from there. Interestingly, opium poppy was evidently domesticated originally in Western Europe about 4000 BC. So, and then there's some sub-Saharan African domesticates, and of course, like I said, the New World domesticates, which are most notably things like tomatoes, maize, very many legumes, potatoes, and a lot of squashes. And of course, maize being the more international term, we would, in the English world, know it as corn. And we should remember the difference between a domesticated crop and a wild crop that is just being cultivated. Wild rice, for example, is just that. It's wild rice. We cultivate it around the Great Lakes region in North America because we like to eat it. Well, some of us do at any rate, but it's not domesticated. Maize will be able to live, whether or not it's being planted and aided by man. But most of our domesticated plants, like bread wheat, maize, potatoes, etc., they will not survive very long without the aid of man. Some can go feral, which is what you call a domesticated plant or animal that is no longer being tended by man. It was created by man, domesticated, through the selective breeding practices. But then it goes out into a field. I guess I know a good example of that would be I don't know if you have them, but yucca plants. People have yucca plants for design and just because of the flowers and stuff like that. I think they're hideous, but some people apparently like them. But I could tell where there used to be houses in a lot of the woods along the mid-Atlantic region of the United States, because I'll find yucca plants for no apparent reason, and then sure enough, move a few leaves around and you realize, oh, there's an old foundation to a house. This used to be somebody's flower bed in their front yard. Otherwise, there wouldn't be that plant out there. I don't know if that one's domesticated or not, but it's definitely an import. Yeah, I guess that's a bad example. But anyway, plants can go feral, and so can the domesticated animal, but not necessarily. Corn, great example. Corn would be dead as shit if we didn't harvest it. If you just leave a field of corn, you're not going to get corn plants growing up the next year, but for very rare exceptions. So corn would almost certainly go extinct within a few years if we stopped growing it, and nobody kept any seeds, and or said kept seeds were all destroyed or something apocalyptic like that. And dogs and cats, of course, they can go feral very easily, but you wouldn't imagine a sheep fending for itself in the forest. In fact, sheep are so dumb, I've heard, that if you leave them out in a field long enough, they could actually eat themselves to death. And chickens would be screwed, of course, although I think ducks might... I'm not even sure if ducks are domesticated, or some of them are, some of them aren't. Anyway, I wanted to get that out of the way. Domestication started with cultivation. People, we presume, would have found, say, a patch of wild berries. They liked eating those berries, but they didn't like the other plants that were growing around them. They were rational and intelligent enough to realize maybe we should cut back these other plants to favor the berries. All right, that's the beginning of cultivation. So they would pull up those other plants, say these berries, and guess what? They got more berries the next year. But if you keep doing that over and over, the next thing you know, you've got this big, huge field of berries, and some of the berry plants don't have berries on them too much. They're like real small, they just look like screwed up runt plants. Well, you rip those out and throw them away. You can do this for a few thousand years. The next thing you know, you have a domesticated berry, potentially. And that's what I'm getting at here. That led them to want to stick nearby that area. Eventually, that led to what we call a semi-nomadic way of living. And that's when you have two or more areas that you move between throughout the year. Oftentimes this involves higher elevation summer grounds, lower elevation winter grounds, although I know some examples in the western United States where that's the other way around. Hot air rises, and in some of those desert valleys it's actually warmer on top of a mesa during the winter than it is in the valley. It's also extremely dry conditions out there. Anyway, being semi-nomadic and cultivating wild edibles, we presume, led to accidental domestication. Then it was just it was just more of the same after that. And frankly, I think that's slightly too simple of an explanation. For one thing, bread wheat almost domesticated itself, which is either a miracle or a misinterpretation of the evidence. Basically, what I'm getting at here is the fact that maize and potatoes were painstakingly domesticated over many thousands of years. In the case of maize, it was at least 6,000 years. They brought a grass basically to a state of what's now modern corn or maize, and that's remarkable. There's archaeological findings from 2000 BC that show corn in the state that's maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches long, and the kernels were about the size of what we would now think of as a grain of white rice. So just in 4,000 years, it increased, 800, 1,200%? So originally it was this little grass called teosinte, which still grows in Mexico. And not only that, but they managed to domesticate several different colors and forms, including popcorn, which is another domesticated version of this teosinte stuff that was turned into corn. I usually think of white corn, yellow corn being two different kinds of sweet corn, and then you have sweet corn and field corn. Field corn, I think, is the same corn you use to grind up and make like tortillas or bread. Corn flour, I think, comes from field corn as opposed to sweet corn, but I could be wrong. And then there's popcorn, which is yet another one. And, of course, it pops, obviously. But you have to remember how 3,000 years ago they would have eaten popcorn. How do you pop it? You don't have clay pots yet. Awfully hard to cook popcorn over an open fire. So apparently the way they did it, they had baskets. So you'd have two guys with a broad, round, shallow basket. Each guy had one basket, a bunch of popcorn seeds on it. And they each would stand on one end of a campfire and toss the seeds and catch them back and forth, and the children would wait around the fire. After a little while, once the corn heated up enough through that process, they would just start popping, and the kids would catch them. And that's how they ate it, so I've heard. Doesn't seem like a very efficient thing to do, and I wouldn't be surprised if popcorn was kind of an accident. Oh, what's this? Hey, it breaks our teeth when we eat it. Hey, when you put it on a fire, then it becomes edible. Okay, how the hell are we going to cook that without burning half the, I don't know. I'm just theorizing. So, I actually have some popcorn growing right now as an experiment, just to see if it'll actually work. Now, another interesting thing is, believe it or not, popcorn, chewing gum, chocolate, potatoes, tomatoes, all come from Mesoamerica. So the modern diet of potato crisps and chips, chocolate, gum, pizza, popcorn, and nachos would have been out of the question before contact was made between the old and new world. I say pizza because of the tomato sauce, but you would still need to have had bread, wheat, and cheese, neither of which the people in Mesoamerica had. They didn't have cows, they didn't have wheat, they didn't have that stuff. And, you'd have to have that in order to make a pizza, so it's kind of a stretch. Alright, let's talk a little bit more about food. Dogs were originally domesticated for their food, we reckon. Dogs are the earliest domesticated anything. There's a fascinating example, actually, of these people that were studying baboons in Afghanistan. And the baboons ended up capturing feral dogs that had run out of, I think, some neighboring village or something, and they were keeping them as pets. It's amazing, and they had them trained and everything. The dogs would, howl, when there was a wolf or something coming near, where all the baboons hung out, and the baboons would fight over who got to play with the dog, and it's fascinating. So on that note, in the New World, the only domesticated animals were basically dogs in North America. In South America, there was a little bit more diversity of domesticated animals. You have in the Andes region, that is to say Peru, Bolivia, some of Chile, a bit of Brazil, there were guinea pigs. Guinea pigs were for their meat. They don't serve any other purpose. I know they might be cute. I think they're just oblong-shaped rats, but whatever. I still don't want to eat them. And then there were llamas, or you'd know them as llamas, and alpacas. Those were not ridden by man. They were not beasts of burden. They could be they could be used to carry about 50 to 70 pounds, but a man could also carry about 50 to 70 pounds. Their roads were built for pedestrian traffic. They used basically young men between the ages of 17 and 28 to move most of their stuff that needed to be moved in 50 to 70 pound increments. But the llamas were for protecting the fields from wolves and the other things that might, or rabbits or deer, something like that. Because apparently, you could use a llama to protect sheep. Their long necks are great for seeing over longer areas, and they're apparently quite vicious. I didn't know that. Until about 8 years ago. Or less than that. Doesn't matter. And the alpacas, of course, they were mostly kept either for their meat or more particularly for their fleece. Alpaca yarn is quite soft. I think it's kind of soft and pretty durable. I'd have to ask my mother about that. Anyway, that's the end of the first part. There's people in this Skype thingy. I don't know if y'all have any questions or not before I move on to geology. But if you don't, I'm just going to move on to geology. Alright. So the National Geographic, what's the date? Doesn't have a date. June 19th, 2013, had an article entitled Atlantic Ocean to Disappear 200 million years ago. Well, it's obviously exaggeration, but the idea is there's a newly discovered crack in the Earth's crust. I'm just going to read it. A newly discovered crack in the Earth's crust could pull North America and Europe together and cause the Atlantic Ocean to vanish in about 220 million years, scientists say. A new map of the seafloor off the coast of Iberia, the region of Europe that includes Portugal and Spain, has revealed what could be the birth of a new subduction zone. Subduction zones happen when tectonic plates, the large rock slabs that make up the Earth's crust, crash into one another. The edge of the heavier plate slides or subducts below the lighter plate on top of it. Then it melts back into the Earth's mantle, the layer just below the crust. The discovery of this new subduction zone, published on June 6th in the journal Geology, could signal the start of an extended cycle that fuses continents together into a single landmass or supercontinent and closes our oceans. This breakup and reformation of supercontinents has happened at least 3 times during Earth's approximately 4 billion year history. In the far future, Earth's continents could, quote, look very much like Pangea, end quote, said the study author Wild Darte, referring to a supercontinent that existed about 200 million years ago. All right, so what's new about this? Newly discovered subduction zone is located in the Atlantic Ocean, about 120 miles, 200 kilometers off the southwest coast of Portugal. It is made up of 6 distinct segments that together span the distance of about 186 miles, or 300 kilometers. The subduction zone is actually a newly formed crack in the Eurasian plate, one of about a dozen tectonic plates that make up the Earth's crust. The Eurasian plate contains all of Europe and most of Asia, and also the eastern half of the Atlantic Ocean up to the mid-Atlantic ridge. That's the thing that's cracking here. In this case, the Eurasian plate is breaking in two, said Darte, a geoscientist at the University of Monash in Australia. And scientists have long suspected that the new subduction zone was forming near the western margin of the Eurasian plate, but they didn't know where exactly. Part of the reason is that the region has been the site of significant earthquake activity, including an 8.7 earthquake in 1755 that devastated Lisbon. Over the past 20 years, several scientific teams from different countries have launched research cruises to map the seafloor around the region to look for proof that a new subduction zone was forming. As part of his research project while at the University of Lisbon, Darte gathered together the data from all of the different mapping projects and combined them to create a new tectonic map of the seafloor off the coast of Portugal. The updated map provided the first conclusive proof that the ocean floor off the coast of Iberia is indeed beginning to fracture, and that the new subduction zone is starting to form. And it's not a fully developed subduction, but an embryonic one, Darte said. What does this mean? The evidence collected by Darte's team indicate that the Eurasian plate could eventually split into separate oceanic and continental sections. Remember that, oceanic and continental sections. If this happens, the oceanic section, which is made up of denser rock, will drive beneath the continental section, which is less dense. This will cause the Atlantic Ocean to shrink and pull North America and Iberia closer together. Other studies have indicated that geologic activity in the region could also pull Africa and Iberia together, causing the Mediterranean Sea to vanish, which I've also heard of before. Basically, Africa is slamming slowly into Europe. Eventually, North America and Iberia will be together again, and the collision will give origin to a new mountain chain similar to the Himalayas. Darte said. What's next? Scientists will continue to study the nascent subduction zone because it could help answer a long-lasting mystery. How the hell do oceans, especially like the ones of the Atlantic, have a passive margin that are free of fractures start to close up? For the first time, we're seeing a passive Atlantic margin turn into a Pacific one, for which the subduction zones are common, Darte said. If you could imagine the Pacific Ocean against Australia, Indonesia, China, Japan, Alaska, America, Canada, South America, it's all subducting. It's all going down. The whole thing. The Pacific Ocean's closing up on all sides. The Atlantic Ocean, however, is expanding, actually, from the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. That's what Iceland is, sort of like the top of a long mountain ridge that doesn't exactly go from pole to pole, but it goes from the North Sea to the shores of Antarctica. And the highest point of that is basically Iceland. That's why it's exposed above the land. And it's spreading, there's magma coming up in that area, so the sea is spreading both to the east and to the west. Well, if the Atlantic on the east side of it, on the European side, starts to crack and subduct underneath Europe, the expansion from Iceland toward Europe would be contraction. It would be expanding the ocean plate, which would keep going under the European plate, and Europe, and effectively the way it would look is Europe would start coming closer to Antarctica. I mean, Europe would start coming closer to Iceland, even though Iceland is still spreading. I know that probably didn't make any damn sense, but I said it anyway. So, what is a continental and oceanic plate? And why can a plate be both? I think that's really the better question. You think, well, if you have all these plates, why would and if you have the oceanic plate and the continental plate being made out of different rock, why are they together? Wouldn't they always be separate? Wouldn't that make sense? To me it would, but that's not what you see. You see parts of oceanic crust connected to continental stuff. That's what we call a passive margin. And eventually that passive margin snaps. Kind of like if you were making something out of clay and it was nice and thick, but you just did this little tapered edge that came out real thin, sort of like you're making a clay knife. The handle might be sturdy if you drop it, but the blade is just going to crack. Well, by comparison, the continents are a big hunk of clay, and the oceanic part of the crust is very, very thin. But it's very dense. It's stronger. It's thinner, but it's stronger pound for pound. So what that means is it'll break off. You know, the continental part will break off from the oceanic part. And since the oceanic part is denser, it has to subduct underneath the continent. And when it subducts under a continent, it goes down into the mantle where it's semi-liquid magma, very hot, molten rock and metal. And that erupts in the form of volcanoes. The volcanoes that you see in the Mediterranean are, in a funny way, caused by Africa, but it's not that Africa is subducting under Europe and getting spat back up in the form of a volcano. It's actually the oceanic plate of the Mediterranean Sea that's subducting underneath both Africa and Europe, but mostly Europe. And the Atlas Mountains, I believe, are sort of the African equivalent of that. But anyway, that's when that subducts, it melts, and then that melting causes pressure, and the pressure makes that molten rock slither up through the crust, and that's how you get volcanoes inland from a subduction zone. You can get volcanoes in other ways too. Hawaii's a hot spot. We don't know how hot spots work, we just know what they are. For some reason, at that point, you're going to get a volcano that's going to erupt through whatever the hell slides on top of it. And since the Pacific Plate's been sliding in the direction it's been, you have the Hawaiian island chain. That's kind of weird. Bermuda is also a hot spot, but it's presently dormant. And more specifically, the difference in the rock between the oceanic crust and the continental crust is that continental crust is mostly granite, quartz, stuff like that. It's what we call siliclastic, or silicaclastic rock. It's composed largely of silica. Oceanic rock has a lot of iron and magnesium in it. That's why they call it mafic. Ma for magnesium and F for, I think it's spelled MAFIC, but it should be MAFEC for iron. So basalt is oceanic rock, and granite is the stereotypical continental rock. If you had two hunks of basalt and granite, one of each, and you smash them together, the basalt would win. And that's why it subducts. And one of the big questions with how, when you go way back in geology before, like when the continents were first forming, because initially the planet was all just, it was like the mantle. It was just semi-liquid molten rock, the whole damn surface of it. Well, eventually the top part started to cool, and that cooling caused a separation once the rock solidified. And that's how you get the crust. Okay, fair enough. Then the oceans formed on top of that crust, or in the same process, we're not sure. Where did the water come from? It either came from comets or chemical processes I don't understand within the planet. I think it came from comets. But it's still, you can have water, like if you have magma coming out of a volcano, or lava coming out of a volcano, there could be water in it, there could be oxygen in it, there could be nitrogen in it, well, there will be nitrogen, there will be oxygen, there will be water in it. And all of that sort of steams out upon its release. Well, that's how the water was. The planet was loaded with water and had no oceans during the period when it was completely molten, because that water just mixed in with the molten shit. Once the molten stuff started to finally solidify, the water separated itself out, went to the surface, because it's less dense, obviously, and probably existed mostly in the form of gas for a long while because it was so hot, and then eventually informed our atmosphere. The reason the atmosphere stuck around the planet is because of the geomagnetic field that we have around the planet protecting us from the sun's solar winds. So the atmosphere didn't blow off, and it stuck around, and eventually you pumped so much moisture into the Earth's atmosphere that it had to condense and form rain, and that eventually probably helped the cooling process, you'd reckon, with the crust solidifying. So what I'm getting at is the first crust was ocean. Everything was an ocean. How do you get mafic rock to turn into felsic rock? Where the hell does felsic rock come from? There's felsic rock volcanoes, but they usually only exist in subduction zones, like those volcanoes I was talking about with the Mediterranean. Those are largely felsic volcanoes, from what I understand, theoretically. Some of them, I mean, I'm sure they can go one way or the other, but if you're going to find a felsic volcano, it's going to be around a subduction zone like that. You're not going to find felsic rock coming out of Iceland. It's going to be complete, 100%, mostly basalt, but other mafic rocks. The reason for that is because the mantle is mafic. The bulk of the molten stuff under the crust is the melted version of oceanic crust. Yet, the continents are this other stuff. Where does it come from? How do you get that? Well, if you originally have the seas forming, the crust solidified, the oceanic crust is all that's there. Some of it's going to be older than some of the other stuff. That which cooled first, perhaps around the poles versus the equator or something like that, I don't know. Well, one of them is going to get older, and it's going to have been under that water a longer period of time. Water eventually will soak into solid stone and make it heavier and wetter through and through. You could actually soak stone. It takes millennia, but you can do it. And eventually those old, I guess you say the first crust, continental crust, the first oceanic crust, would have subducted under newer oceanic crust. And when you add water to rock and subject it to heat and pressure, you change the temperatures at which various chemicals will form and start to create crystals. Like if you want quartz, for example, you need to have basically medium heat, medium pressure. If you have medium heat, light pressure, you don't get quartz. You get something else I don't remember. If you have medium heat and you have all right, well, basically what I'm saying is when you have rocks forming, the way rocks form is because, for example, this is just wrong, but I just want to give you an abstract example. Quartz, in order to have a quartz crystal form, you need to have, say, medium pressure and medium heat. Well, if you have medium pressure and heavy heat, really, really hot, you're not going to get quartz. You're going to get something different. Well, if you add water to the mix, you increase the temperature that process happens. So basically, if the rock is dry and you have medium heat and medium pressure, you're going to get quartz. But if the rock is wet and you still have medium heat and you still have medium pressure, you're not going to get quartz. You're going to get something different because that water's thrown in there and it's changed the temperature at which these minerals will actually form their crystalline structures and grow. So when you have a water-soaked oceanic plate subducting under what's kind of a drier, younger oceanic plate, the volcano...
Right.
Yeah?
I've got a geode, an amethyst geode.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been cut in half. I'm lucky enough it hasn't broken, so it's a full geode. You can open it up and put it together. And I'm told they're formed by when lava or whatever it is, rock of some description, is spat out, and then that lands in peat or a bog. Yeah, and it dries it. It cures it at the right speed, so the crystal forms on the inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds
I just
about right.
It's not often I can actually contribute anything to you, Miles, but I did know that little bit. I thought I'd jump in.
Well, it's like you said, that outside of it is a different kind of rock than the inside of it, but they still came from the same batter.
Yeah, like you say, in the way it was like cured. I don't think cured's the right word, really. It's forming the crystal, isn't it? But yeah, and like I say, if they didn't land in water, then they wouldn't form in the geode. It's because the outside cools a lot quicker than the inside.
Exactly.
And it expands outwardly to meet.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly right. And it's that difference in temperature where you're able to get two completely different things. Like the outside of that geode and the amethyst on the inside are about as different as they could possibly be, right?
Well, yeah.
There?
Oh, yeah, definitely, man. Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, all the outside.
But they all came from the same thing.
The outside looks a bit like concrete. And, you know.
I always thought they looked like quartzite.
No, it's like rock right around the outside. And as because it's been cut, you can see it as it forms up to the tips. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pretty amazing stuff, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
And the other bit you mentioned about, was it gyp? Like, oh no, I can't remember what it's called. There's another one that's really, we get a lot of it, besides quartz, selenite, which they make gypsum out of. Concrete and plaster. We have
that's very heavy, that's very high in silica.
That's the one.
Source of thing. Yeah, they're like gypsum is mostly silica.
If you actually get a piece of it and shine light at one end, it travels all the way down to the other end like an optical fiber. It's brilliant stuff.
Well, have you ever seen sheets of mica before?
Yeah, I've had a few sheets of mica. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's a table. It's not actually. It's a floor in a temple. I think it's a Mayan temple in Mexico or Guatemala. But they have, I think it's 100 meters by 50 meters. And it's like 1/4 of an inch thick sheet of mica, one sheet.
I've got a piece of...
that stuff is like...
Yeah, it's not that big.
It's like candy. It has the consistency of candy. It's like a lollipop. You drop it on the floor, it's just going to shatter. You can actually bend it. It's kind of flexible until it snaps.
The selenite stuff, I've got a piece of selenite. It's about...
Is that with a C or an S?
5 inches across. C, I think. 5 inches across. And about 2.5 foot long. It's a nice piece. And that works. I bought that years ago to put on the light box. Because if you put a light underneath it, it's brilliant stuff. It literally just travels the full length of it and comes out the other end. So, but you don't often get it in its natural form. It doesn't do well around water.
Right.
Breaks up, starts to crumble, obviously.
It almost looks like a salt.
It does a bit, yes. But all the plates are laid in the same direction.
Yeah. You know what that's called? Cleavage.
Really?
Yeah, that's actually the geologic term for that. It's called cleavage.
That.
The planes that with mica and schist, you could actually take a pocket knife and just cut and slice off the layers of certain rocks. That's their cleavage. When you see things that kind of look like steps, like Yanagumi, the monument, that's the natural cleavage of the rock. That's why it breaks in those forms. There's a temple near Southeast Asia somewhere that they've actually made man-made islands out of logs of stone that you just hit them with a hammer and you break off this. It looks like a hexagon or an octagon, and it's like a pillar of stone, and then there's another pillar behind it. They're all laid down on their side, and you break them out of this hillside, and they kind of float, sort of, not really, but they're easy enough to put on little canoes and float over, and they stack them up like Lincoln logs, and then fill the thing in with dirt in a shallow lagoon, and they build a temple on top of it. They didn't actually carve those patterns on those rocks. They just took advantage of the natural cleavage of that rock.
There's a lot in taking natural advantage, isn't there? Our predecessors.
Why wouldn't you? Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't?
Rather than what we do now. Now we tend to not, don't we?
A good friend of mine usually says, don't work harder, work smarter.
Oh, I've got to learn that one.
Yeah. But another thing I wanted to get in, so we've got mafic and felsic rock more or less described. We all know about the basics of plate tectonic theory, that you have different plates. Now, there's another one that's called isostasy, otherwise pronounced isostasy, which is harder to say for me. So I'm going to say isostasy. That's when you... trying to think of a boat analogy. If you build a boat with a very deep keel that goes 30 feet below the surface of the water, the boat is going to be higher in the water than if you didn't have that keel there. And the reason for that is isostasy. When you have a mountain forming from a volcano, and the land is getting, thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker, well, it's floating on top of the mantle. The continent and the ocean, all the crust is floating on the mantle, so it's basically like a boat. And if you make that boat taller, it's going to sink further down into the water, right? You put more weight on it, so it's going to sink down further. Well, if you start eroding through the process of wind and rain and all that stuff, you start eroding that mountain away. It's like shaving off the top of the mast. You're slowly but surely making that boat lighter and shorter, so it's going to rise up in the water. The continents are rising as we speak in North America, because there used to be 2+ miles thick, from ground up, 2 miles of solid ice, basically from the U.S.-Canada border up to as far as the land goes. And the Hudson Bay, the Great Lakes, even Niagara Falls, and the St. Lawrence River running towards Quebec is that land is all as one mass, and North America is slowly rising up because that ice isn't there anymore. That weight's been removed. It's been removed quite quickly, as a matter of fact. It was there 14,000 years ago, and 6,000 years ago there ain't shit. So that's a lot of weight that's been lost.
Miles, how much are we talking? Could that account for the drop in sea level?
We're talking hundreds of feet.
So it would actually. If
a few million years from now, the Hudson Bay will be a valley that's probably 1,000 feet above sea level. I might be exaggerating slightly. I'd have to research it, but you get my point. It's
What I'm trying to guess is, we've got the sea levels are dropping.
Yep. And that's from this process called isostasy or isostasy.
Brilliant, Miles. Thank you very much. You just smashed loads of holes in that so-called truth movement.
And so another thing about the Great Lakes, if you guys in Europe aren't familiar, we call them lakes because it's fresh water. It's not like the Black Sea or the Caspian Sea, which are salty as heck. These are freshwater lakes. They're polluted. I wouldn't recommend drinking the water, but at least at one point they were, they don't have salt in it, at least. But, and that's not entirely true. I think Lake Superior you can still drink. You just have to filter it. But anyway, they're all fresh water bodies. And the reason they're fresh water is, guess where that water came from? I was just talking about 2-mile thick ice sheets in the same area that melted.
Ice.
They filled up these things. That's where that water came from. At one point, it's speculated maybe about 10,000 years ago, or a little earlier, there was actually a dam of ice that formed somewhere around, let's say somewhere around the Niagara Falls, southern Ontario towards New York. And, the Great Lakes were all one big, huge lake. And all that water was pressed up against this dam of ice that eventually burst. And apparently you had, within a century, about 10 feet of sea level rise, which means you instantly had a lot of water pouring into what would have been the North Atlantic, but it's still going to spread throughout, and once the whole world's water level sort of evens itself out, to about a century. Yeah. I think that's where the ancient flood myths come from, because there are lots of places in the world. There's a place in the Black Sea. There's a place in the Red Sea. The Red Sea between Africa and, the Persian Gulf between Iran and Saudi Arabia. There used to be a river valley. The whole length of it was a river valley. There was a little river running down it, which was the Tigris and Euphrates actually joined right around southern Iraq, or it might actually be in Kuwait. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the map to be precise. But the Tigris and Euphrates actually connect and form one river that drains into what's now the Persian Gulf. Well, the Persian Gulf just used to be a valley. It's no more than 200 or so feet deep. So you went into this valley. There's this river that kept on going out towards the Arabian Sea. Well, that was flooded in spurts, because you've got a flat area where you can go 8 or 9 miles and it's only a 5, 10, 15 foot rise. Well, if you go from, if you have a 100 foot or a 30 foot or a 50 foot rise in sea level, instantly from a dam breaking, or from this water gets up to this one point and then it floods down into this valley on the other end of it, you can end up with a lot of water really quick. And guess where people live? Where there's water. Let's say you're in a survival situation. Les Stroud, Survivor Man. Anybody that hasn't heard of him, look his stuff up if you're even mildly interested in any of this paleotechnology stuff. That guy is fantastic. But when you're, in a plane crash or you get lost in the woods or something like that, and you find a river, fresh water, you could drink it, you don't know where you are, you don't know when you're going to get rescued, or even indeed if you're going to get rescued. Are you going to leave that water supply? No, not unless you think you can get to something better. So people live around rivers. Guess what got flooded? River valleys. You're going to, all around the world, you would have had people experiencing floods, roughly around the same period of time, from about 13 to 6,000 years, or 13,000 BC to 6,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago to 15,000 years ago, ish. So, yeah. Quick, maybe a stupid question. You mentioned about the Great Flood myth, as you called it. If there was a Great Flood, well, if there was, I don't know, I wasn't around at that time. If there was a Great Flood, wouldn't it be brackish? Wouldn't the Great Lakes then have been brackish? Wouldn't they have had at least some salt content? Because they would have filled up with seawater, wouldn't they? The Great Lakes in North America never did fill up with salt water, but the Persian Gulf did. The Persian Gulf is brackish actually, I think it's just straight up seawater to this day. Yeah.
So the Great Flood might not have been if it was, then might not have been as great as previously thought.
All depends on where you are. If you're in the center of Asia, you never heard of any flood. You're not on the beach. You have to be near a beach in order to experience this. But the thing
right.
Is,
so yeah,
the bulk of people do live around the beach because there's more stuff there to eat. Fish, that kind of stuff. The weather's usually more stable along a coastline. There's, when weather's more stable, you get more plants, you get more game to hunt. There's a whole host of reasons why it's a good idea to live near a coastline. And as a second best option to a coastline would be a river.
Yeah, well, you can see that, can't you, with early settlements and stuff. They tended to go from the coast up the rivers.
Yeah. And not just with, in recent history, the United States and the East is all founded along rivers. But Virginia actually didn't even have serious roads until cars were invented. There was a law in the 1800s in Virginia that said a road could not be legally called a road unless the stumps were less than 18 inches in height. Yeah, great road system. Anyway.
I think most of the northwest of England opened up with the canal network. miles. So, and they link the river waterways together.
And we did a little bit of canals too, but the thing that happened with the canals, which is really fascinating, you know why you have more canals in England than we do in the United States?
Because you had railway when you started over canal works, I suppose. The technology.
Exactly. We have one big famous canal system. It's the Erie-Hudson Canal that connects New York City with the Great Lakes. That's the single greatest and still functioning to this day canal system in the United States.
I wonder how many times they've replaced the railway for the same number of times as the canal. That's the good thing about it, isn't it? They don't need as much maintenance, or you don't have to keep replacing them. They just keep going.
They don't need as much maintenance, but they do need more time. You know, and there's a size limit. If it's wider than the canal, you can't ship it. You have the same problem with the trains, but at least not quite as much, I guess, as long as there's no tunnels. I don't know. But yeah, you're right. And but the other thing is, most of the canals were powered by oxen. You had what they call a tow path on either side of the canal, and they'd hook up a team of oxen, connect the rope to the boat, and there you go. They'd push your ass along. That's how the canals were powered, basically. The rest of it's powered by gravity and hydraulic forces when you get to the lock systems.
Yeah, it's the same here. Well, they were horses. There wasn't a big call for oxen in the UK.
Our canals use oxen. Okay.
Yeah, they used horses here, ponies really, even pit ponies, because of the tunnels, narrow boats, especially up in the north.
You have canals with tunnels?
Yes.
No shit, I've never heard of that.
Some massive ones here, mate.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Huh. Because I've heard of an aqueduct bridge where you can bring a canal over, like on a bridge, where it's a bridge with water in it.
Right.
I've heard of that, but I've never heard of a canal tunnel.
Within 15 minutes walk from my house, there's a canal aqueduct going over a river.
They really wanted to build that damn canal, didn't they?
Going on. Well, it circumnavigates Manchester. So you can imagine.
Oh, what? If there's a mountain in the way, I mean, wow. That's
they went through it.
Wow. Because I know a lot about there's two canals that go from Washington, D.C. towards Ohio. None of them actually go to Ohio, but that was the idea. One of them was built on the Virginia side, partially financed by George Washington. It failed miserably. I think it only ever went to Leesburg. But they came up to hills where they had to maintain a 1% grade on the canal, and they ended up cutting through 200 feet of solid rock to force this canal through. Like, man, no wonder it failed. But there's another one on the Maryland side that was much more successful. It's called the C&O Canal, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. It goes from Georgetown, which is part of Washington, D.C., all the way up to Cumberland, Maryland. And there's the second canal that kind of goes from Cumberland to Pittsburgh, but it didn't ever really work. And there's parts of it where you actually have to use a road and go over land and make a portage. But the idea was to connect Cumberland, Maryland on the Potomac River with Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is on the Monongahela and Ohio rivers.
I was just looking for you, Nigel, Miles, to see if I could spot, and I think I found one here with the videos. You can perhaps have a look at it a little bit later. And they're actually what they call legging on one of the videos, and this is because there was no towpath inside the tunnel.
So how'd they do it?
To send the horse in.
Did they just sort of do like the like in Venice with a pole and just sort of push themselves?
No. They put a plank across the width of the boat, from port to starboard, which stuck out a few inches, and the two bargemen would lie with their heads together and put their feet on the tunnel wall.
No shit.
And walk it.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it worked really. They do actually now have
to hold on to one another's shoulders and that.
No, you're just lying. You're lying down. I've actually done this. I've actually tried this years ago.
You're lying on your side?
On your back.
How's that?
You lie on your back. Yeah, and you
sort of walk like sideways.
Sideways, yes.
Yeah. I see.
Yeah, they were quite efficient. Now some of them would lie on the roof, and walk with the feet on the roof as well.
How long is this tunnel?
The one at the Peak Forest. I'll check for you, Miles. I don't want to give you.
So it's not like a mile or two.
Oh no, it's more than a mile.
What?
I'll check for you. I'll check the link distance.
I'm going to tell you, if I had a job with a portage company in 1790 and they were like, all right, young man, lay on your back and sort of like slide your ass through that tunnel there. Okay, how far is it? Oh, it's 3 miles. Fuck you. Why don't you get a goddamn rope and a pulley? We're going to have a horse walk that way, and it's going to make me go that way. You dick. Hey.
Yeah, I'm not having much luck getting the lens for you. I'm on the wrong site, really. But, yeah, there's a haunted one. There's a haunted tunnel.
Gee, go figure. Yeah.
Yeah, he died of
I know the perfect place to kill that hooker. Well, how about we take a little break? I like a little break after an hour.
Yeah, sure, man. So that coming up right now.
And now, broadcasting from multiple ground stations across the planet, this is Dark City Radio.
Just don't mind. I can feel the sun on my face. place. I can understand why this is the place. I don't need to be anywhere but here. I don't need to be anywhere but here. Take a stroll down the bay. Take your time, don't stress to someone. I can feel the sun on my face. I can understand why this is the place. I don't need to be anywhere but you. I don't need to be anywhere but you.
Welcome to the show.
What show is that?
Welcome to the show.
I'm trying to connect now.
Unable to connect. If you have an internet connection, go fuck yourself, because it doesn't matter. Fuck it, we're talking about trains now for a minute. The 4000 series, damn it, 4884. 4884. The first, you've got, 4 wheels in the front, 2 axles in the front of the train, that they just support the front of it. Then you have 8 wheels that are drive wheels. Then you have an articulation in the length of the locomotive engine so that it's on a pivot. Then you have another 8 drive wheels. That's your second, 488. And then at the end, underneath where the conductor would be at the very back end of this thing, you had 4 more wheels on 2 other axles. And
we must count it in the UK in a different way, because our Flying Scotsman was 4472. So that would I don't know where they get the 7 from.
Well, I've heard of a 10. I've heard of a 4104. I think it is. Better, it's a 4410-4. But yeah, they actually have so it's 5 drive wheels on the left and 5 drive wheels on the right. So you've got 10 drive wheels. Which,
if I may, Miles, just so the listeners know how we ended up.
Piston steam locomotive engine technology of the early 20th century.
From the canals, and the thing was the Huddersfield Canal, which lies very close to myself. And that canal length was 3.2 miles, so just under 3.25 miles.
3.24.
Yes.
Yeah, it's basically 3.25 miles, and they were getting these little Cockney kids, oh, how you doing? Yeah, get your ass in there and fucking move that. Oh, my God. Can you imagine what it must have been like for a garbage, thing to go through that 3.5-mile tunnel with the weather y'all had? Ugh. Anyway, all the rats in there, and ugh. Just seems horrible.
I think you'll find they were street urchins, Miles.
Street urchins?
Yeah.
That's what you call them?
Urchins.
Okay.
And just so people know, the shortest canal, which is still a tunnel, that is the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, and that's just under 1 mile long. So, yeah, there's considerable amount. Quite a few of them, unfortunately, are now disused. But that's the one at 3.4 miles was actually opened in 1811. The oldest one, I think, which is in use, goes back to 1789. Let me check. Yes, 1789, which is on the Thames and Severn Canal, which is 2.17 miles long. So yeah, that's been open for a considerable amount of excuse me, that's disused. No, 1792, and you can still use it. Boats are towed through, and that's up at Dudley. So I think that's the oldest one that's currently open, but no doubt listeners may know something else. But, yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of them, Miles, and they are quite long. But these are narrow canals, Miles. The boats, I think, are 6'10" in the beam, the width of them. So the narrow canals, but very long, very long. And just as a side note, Miles, if you actually have a tender, that's a smaller vessel, what would be known as a smaller vessel, and you tow it behind, there is no limitation on the length of a tender on the canal, only what is governed by the locks. So, depending on where you go, and as long as you've got a narrow boat, and I think it's 62 feet long, then you can navigate round all the canal network in the north, in Britain. But if there's one canal, and I do think it is on the Dudley Canal. I'm not too sure, but there's one lot where you have to what they call shoehorn the boat. Because it's shorter, they have to put the boat the bar in the diagonal.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That's what we would call articulation with these.
It's a wider gauge canal, you see there, but the locks are actually shorter. So, 62 foot I think is the maximum length. They do them longer than that, of course. But yeah, just as a bit of a side note, it is quite interesting, Miles, the canal network. Although there's not a great deal to see when you do come across it, the simplicity of how it actually works. I have a dry dock near me, which is just like a spur off the canal, and at the end of that spur, they have a slot on either side where they drop down like scaffolding planks, short ones, and they drop a series of them down the slot and just keep putting them in until they come up above the water level, and then they open a sluice at the other end, which the water starts to drain out. And then the silt and the leaves and the rubbish that's in the canal literally pushes up against the boards and seals it. Really simple. And that then drains into the river. The water from it drains into the river, and there you have
it can be flushed periodically on demand, right?
Well, no, it is. It's actually doing that. It's actually releasing water down that, and the leaves and the debris slowly move down there. So they were actually cleaning it. Yeah. When it isn't working, of course, then it would eventually silt up, and you would lose the use of that spur of the canal. That's actually what keeps it pretty maintained.
That's why I was saying, if you wanted to, you could just leave the locks open for a little while and flush it out if that was starting to happen.
Really, what keep it would help, but I think really what keeps the canal network open are the boats keep moving and down them, because it's always churning up the silt in the bottom of, and that's what keeps it all moving. Of course, when you're not getting any traffic down them and they're not being used, just like everything else, I suppose. So they were designed to be used, and of course now they are being used, Miles. There's been quite a lot over the last few years, especially locally, over the last 20 years, since I grew up, and they were closing the canals, filling them in, putting car parks and supermarkets on them. And the local people won cases in Europe. And
I've been under the impression, just from that Peep Show, that there are several canals that are kept in use, kind of like parks, sort of. It's sort of for recreational use. It's not used to haul freight anymore or anything, but they preserve certain sections of it so that people can, use them and enjoy them. all around Britain?
No, it's all open. It can all be used. There's people running businesses on them commercially. It's not as big as it used to be, Miles, you know.
Yeah,
Most people who are running the businesses are now servicing the pleasure craft. And homes,
right.
a lot of people make their homes on them.
Yeah. But getting back to my favorite train, it's Union Pacific Railroad's 4000 class 4884 articulated steam locomotive. It's built between 1941 and 1944 by the American Locomotive Company, and I think there are only 25 that were ever produced. They had 4 cylinders that each cylinder drove 4 drive wheels. It could go up a 1.14% grade, hauling 3,600 short ton of freight, which is 3,300 tons, up that hill at 79 miles per hour.
That sounds just like Sparky going camping.
That's fucking insane. That's one locomotive engine. I don't mean they strung 4 of them together and towed. That's a mile plus of freight cars going up to a train. A 1.0% incline to a train is to a car what like a 10% incline is. By the way, a 10% incline is we're not talking about degrees. We're talking percentage of incline. A 1% incline would rise 1 foot over 100 feet, or any other unit you want to use. 1 meter over 100 meters would be the same difference, I think.
I just found quite an interesting fact about the Fosdyke Canal in the UK. Do you know anything about this, Bob? It's the oldest canal in the UK. It was built at 120 AD by the Romans.
Wow, that sounds about right. That would have been about 60 years after Boudica.
Yeah, I didn't know that at all until I started looking. That's quite astounding.
Yep. Boudica was in, I think, 61.
So yeah, Miles, another way we just drift back onto that. I've just got another interesting fact. The Huddersfield Canal, which I mentioned before, which has got the Stanbridge Tunnel on it, but they've actually got it down. It's in meters. Excuse me, that's right.
I can switch. I know metric.
Is the 3rd longest tunnel canal tunnel in the world. So.
Yeah, that's so. You crazy Englishmen were just like, God damn it, we're going to make this fucking raft float.
You think so? You think the English are crazy?
It had to have been some kind of immense, indefatigable determination where it's like, hey, maybe we could just go around. That'd be easier. No, we want to go straight.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of hills, Miles. They didn't get a lot of choice. They did take the easiest route.
And all the more determination, man. It's like even thinking, like I would have gone out there and said, making a canal, are you crazy?
Any reason to show off the engineering of the time, that's all they needed.
Well, yeah, I mean, you think the English were crazy, Miles. Just let me point out to you
don't worry, I think the Americans are crazy too.
Oh, no. The Americans don't even get a look in here, Miles. They really don't. At number 1... we have
we took over a continent in 200 years. Anyway.
7,120 meters, Miles. It's the French. So yeah, the French.
Yeah, well, the French couldn't finish the Panama Canal, now could they?
But they are running.
They didn't have the damn quinine.
In all fairness to them, they are running number 1, number 2, number 4, 5th, and 6th. In the world. So yeah, they have got some pretty big canal tunnels in France, and then really
France also has navigable rivers that crisscross. Like that's one of the. If you guys didn't know this already, one of the unique things about Europe is that it has rivers that go very deep into the continent. The Danube goes way up into Germany from the Black Sea. There's the Rhine that goes damn near up to the Danube. you know, that one of the reasons the Vikings wreaked such havoc is that they could just sort of utilize these rivers. It's just like, oh, look at all these fucking monasteries we can invade. Yoink, 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 yoink. Oh, let's go to Kiev and sell it to the Prussians. You know, but
I just want to point out, besides England and France there in the top, there is Norway, and that is still it's an ongoing project. So canals have not actually died out.
Why? Dude, you're kidding me. Norway's building canals?
Yes, it's a project, an ongoing project.
Seriously?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Maybe they must be utilizing the fjords. That must be the explanation.
Well, it's a tunnel. It's a canal tunnel.
So they're connecting like one fjord to another through a mountain that's betwixt the two or something. All right, I can see that.
Yeah.
That is neat.
It's actually known as a ship tunnel.
Yeah.
So the
hell if I'm going around. Yeah.
Yeah.
These storms and stuff like that, or it just blocks up with ice. I bet if they're having a tunnel, the warmth within the mountain in that tunnel would actually keep some of that water from freezing. I would speculate.
Yeah, I really wouldn't like to say. I wouldn't know. I just wouldn't know.
Either that, or it'd be more prone to freezing because there's less of it.
Well, I imagine there'd be a current flowing from one side maybe to the other.
You'd think, but it'd probably be a tidal flow, so it'd be sort of equally going from one end out to the other.
Yeah, well, they'll have to put locks on that tidal, obviously, because otherwise the tunnel...
They just have to build it. They'd have, well...
water and everybody die.
You'd have to come up with some sort of happy median where, it's like no matter what, the tunnel is tall enough and deep enough so that if it's low tide or high tide, you can still fit a ship through it.
Like the Thames floodgates.
Yeah.
They put locks in it so they keep the water level the same.
Yeah. Yeah. So glad I don't live near a city that needs floodgates. Yeah, like New Orleans. I feel sorry for New Orleans. Frankly, it's one of the oldest cities in North America. Frankly, but it's a goner. I don't just mean because global warming, sea level rise. I just mean sea level stays the same thing it is right now for 300 years. Within 100 years, that city's fucked.
Although we were based on tunnels, I just got a bit of a text from one of our Dark City crew, and it's saying that the USA completed a canal to the Gulf of Mexico.
From where?
Ah, right. Well, there you go.
Across Florida? I mean, what are they talking about?
Cutting out most of Florida.
Well, if you wanted to go through the southern part of Florida, my grandparents, my grandmother actually is from a place near Lake Wales, Florida, and there's a mountain out there. You know how high above sea level that mountain is? It's the highest point in all of Florida. It's arguably between 97 and 103 feet. So making a canal anywhere in Florida is not a particularly marvelous achievement. That and the fact that it's a peninsula, you could sail around it. What the devil do you need a canal for? Unless you're going from around the northern part, closer to Tallahassee or something.
No, like I say, Miles, it was just a bit of info that came in. But yeah, there does appear to be. I think what the point they were making is the USA are responsible for some pretty good canals anyway. Don't feel so left out, Miles. You're all right.
I know, and I started off
rubbish with tunnels.
We didn't have this on the show. This was during the break. Yeah, I was saying you had the Erie Hudson Canal.
I want to hear your story, man.
Great Lakes with New York. That's the best canal we have in the U.S. that I'm aware of.
Are we having your...
Everything else is railroads.
We're sat here patiently waiting for this story, All
right, well, let's start on it. So, I'd like to explain one of my ideas for a series of short stories. If anyone's heard of the Edgar Rice Burroughs A Princess of Mars series. That's the form of short story serial I plan to write. Otherwise, in terms of story and substance, I don't have anything to do with The Princess of Mars. But that is cool, and I would recommend anybody that they want to check out the John Carter of Mars movie. I know it's from Disney, but they did a good job on it. So, basically, the story I'm tentatively naming right now, Retarded Prometheus. And for purposes of what I'm going to explain right now, this part takes place about 8,000 BC. It's about 10,000 years ago. The date's not the important part. What I'm trying to narrow down is when agriculture was first coming into peoples that had previously been hunter-gatherers around northwestern France. And this is before the sea levels started to rise completely. This is during that transitional period when the ice sheets were melting. So you would have had a valley and a very big sort of narrow estuary between Normandy and the coast of England. The English Channel hadn't flooded yet. And my protagonist here is living with a group of these early farmers. They have no animals, no beasts of burden. They've only been farming wheat and lentils for less than 5 generations. They grow wheat and lentils and cultivate wild berries, like I was describing earlier, and they also have some wild herbs that they grow. In the process of inventing fencing, and large deer and rabbits and stuff have been eating their crops, and that's been the single biggest hindrance to them trying to start being farmers, because they just have these plants that they got from these other people that through a trade route system. They live far away. They know almost nothing about doing this. The trades that they have are people that knap flint, which is when you make a flint tool. It's called flint knapping. You chip at it. You have stone cutters that make walls and house foundations. You have people that specialize in hunting. You have people that specialize in building homes and repairing things. You have people that specialize in hunting fish. And then you have other people that tan leather from hides as their specialty. And these are the basic trades that this population has at the time. They have a fractured system of shamans. There's sort of a three-way split between conservatives, progressives, and a third radical wing that wants to bring animal husbandry into this mix, because they've heard of that. The conservatives basically are nature worshippers who think that controlling plants is wrong and morally, and that and they're the smallest minority, about 5 to 15%. The progressives are also nature worshippers, but they think they are the rightful stewards of these domesticated plants, and that they are the majority, and they're the majority and want to keep things the way they are. That is, continuing to improve upon their growing techniques. They argue once the crop losses due to deer and rabbits can be stopped, they will have more food than they could possibly hope to eat. And then you have the radicals, and they're somewhat grouped in with the progressives in that they also see themselves as stewards of these crops, but they want to extend that stewardship to animals as well. And they've heard and seen such practices by peoples in their east and south, which are people that have pigs and goats and dogs. My protagonist character... Oh, wait, I'm not supposed to read that part. Oops. There's another group of nomads. They're pretty much the same people. They speak the same language and have the same religion, but they never adopted these plants. They never adopted having any agriculture, so they're still hunting and gathering, and they think the other guys are crazy, and they've been fighting them because the area where it's best to grow the plants is also the area where these two rivers meet, and that's where the game usually, it becomes narrow. It's easy to hunt in that area. They've been hunting there for thousands and thousands of years, and it's a great place to do that, but they can't because these assholes are growing lentils and wheat. So they're fighting them. And since they eat bugs and all kinds of things we would think of as being nasty, the people are extremely racist, essentially, and they hate them, so they call them bug eaters and shit eaters. And that's going to come up in the bit of this first chapter that I'm going to read. There's a lot more to this story that I can't really tell you all right now, so getting into the thing. So this is Retarded Prometheus, Chapter 1, my first draft, subject to a lot of change. On a night when the moon was going to be full, Guy was walking across the plaza to get some water from the river. This was a routine thing for him, and the distance from his parents' house was not that very far. He shouldn't have been long, much longer than 5 minutes, bearing the fact that the plaza was filled with hundreds of people. It seemed as though the whole valley had come down to see this month's court. Every month, there was a common court that was held at the full moon where everyone could declare their objections. When disputes could not be settled, they would be allowed 3 months to calm down. A second court would be held, and if that didn't work, they'd fight to the death. The fights were conducted in the plaza and were moderated by the mass of people forming a very large circle. The weapons were 2 rocks, one about 15 pounds and another about 5 pounds. The 2 contestants would each start at the opposite end of this circle of people, held back by their supporters. When the word was given, both sides would release their man, and they would head for the center where these 2 weapons were located. The winner of the duel, if there ever was one, usually they both ended up dying of internal bleeding or head trauma by morning, got all the other's property. But if that party had died within 1 year of the fight, on a 13-month cycle, lunar cycle, no property was transferred to the heirs. So on this night, Guy was walking through this mass, and they were getting ready for the big fight. His friend from the neighboring field plot next to his found him and called out to him, "Hey, Guy, what the hell is wrong with you not attending the fight tonight? Don't you want to see that Bruthe? Don't you think that Bruthe guy deserves to die?" Guy says, "Yeah, but he's stronger than both of us combined, and he's, like half the age of the man he's fighting?" His friend replies, "Well, you would say that, but yeah, the man he's fighting, Mr. Glicky, is the most powerful martial artist of all people. You remember that just 3 years ago he was in that riot and single-handedly fought 300 people." Guy sighs and shrugs, having realized long ago that there would never be any convincing him that that story was made up, and that man had himself actually stated this the past 5 moon courts. What happened was that he simply convinced the people to stop talking. Once they managed to shut them all up, he was able to separate out the radicals, and once that, everything was boring, so everybody else went home. Well, I pray you will. Somehow I do eventually think this will be a worthy fight. Guy is just walking away with his water sack. Then he finally gets to the river and fills his thing. Realizes that there's somebody across the river aiming a bow and arrow at him. He ducks down to his left and rolls at about a 45-degree angle away from the river. The arrow strikes the water about 10 feet from him where the water's edge was. He runs up the hill to the town, yells out for help, and 3 guardsmen come running down from the posts on the hill. They tell him to go back home and summon the Master Killer, which is the title of the leader of the fighters. He's like the general. Within 10 minutes, scouts are fording the river searching for whoever that might have been. Finally, Guy gets home with his water, shaken and pissed off. "Is the crowd really that bad?" his mother asks. "Yeah, well, it's such as that. I got shot by a fucking bug eater again," exclaimed Guy. "Watch it, son. You don't need to talk to your mother like that," his father says as he came into the room. "Please get the boy something to drink, Lily. After all, he's just been shot again. 3rd time this week, eh, my boy?" Yeah, Father. 3 times this week. Frankly, I prefer not to count anymore," Guy said with a mix of contempt and sadness. "Now you're getting it. That's manhood, son. Soon you'll join the Braves and kill those worm-eating sons of shit-eaters any day," Guy's father exclaimed. "Filthy," Lily screamed. "You know he's not joining the fighters. If he does join them, I will become one too and kill you." "Hello, don't I have a say in this?" Guy says as he's taking the wintergreen out of his cup of tea. I have no desire to join the fighters because I suck at fighting. However, I agree with Father that those people need to be killed. If the Mr. Gleckley character today does actually win this fight tonight, loses the fight tonight, there will be no one who could train the men. More like boys, Lily muttered. That's ridiculous. And I told you to stop associating with those radical malcontents, Bilthy grunted. Besides, Ruthie is a very skilled fighter. There's no reason that's the reason he's second master killer. Yes, but he defeated Mr. Glicky, and having killed over 1,000 bug eaters doesn't mean that he can actually teach men to do the same, Guy shouted. Silence, you. I could have you put on trial for insubordination for not supporting me, Bilthy shouted back. You'd think, but I'm engaged to be married, and once I am, you'll no longer have any legal authority over me or my Lithani, Guy said as he got up to leave the house. Boys, can't we have one night where this doesn't come up? Lily asked as she was putting dinner on the table. Well, yes, when I leave and return to visit as a married man, said Guy. Bilthy was about to explode. All right, already. Bilthy, you know you're powerless in this matter, and the approval of marriage is up to the mothers and the bride and the bridegroom. You know I like Lithani and her mother. She and I were both on the Supreme Council of Shaman together. You know this. She introduced us for God. Lily is becoming frustrated now and seems like she might faint. How could you forget that, she says. Guy was relieved in this, as his father was becoming visibly disturbed as Guy sat by, gleefully munching on his porridge and lentils, staring maniacally at his father. I'm not hungry tonight, Lil, Bilthy said. I'm going to bed. You win, you little shit, as he looked to Guy and got up and left the room. I really wish you would stop doing that to him, Guy, Lily said as she served herself some porridge. You will eventually realize that he means you well, although his desire for power does disturb me. He was never that way before we started controlling the rabbits and the deer. Lily looks down at her bowl and detest. Well, the fences aren't as cruel as the traps and the overhunting, are they? Guy asked. Yeah, for the animals. But what about the weeds? What about the moths? What about the flies and the wasps? What of the favor we are bestowing upon the spiders by adding such contraption in her fields? Lily rebutted. It's her with a capital H. It comes out better when you're reading it. Yeah, well, there's always that, Guy said under his breath. Enough, we're both hungry. Can't we at least agree on that for a while and wait while that poor man dies tonight? Lily exclaimed. I thought you didn't like radical ideas, Guy said with some surprise. I don't agree with his ideas, but his means I agree with. He seeks to let everyone live as they wish. If you want to have mastery over Earth, go for it. Don't force others who don't want to live that way into doing that. I also don't think that it'll ever work for him in the long run, and that makes me have little to harbor against him. Besides, there's so much Earth to go around, even beyond the Great River or more lands to the north, Lily exclaimed. One of these days I'll explore the other valleys of the world and bring back animals we could ride as fast as the deer can run, Guy proclaimed with his food in his mouth. You can may well try, son, but it will spell your doom. Animals serve themselves just as we do. How would you like it if a rabbit figured out how to tie you up and make you move rocks around for him to have a nice place to live, or to dam a river and trap hundreds of fish? Lily asked with a coy look. I doubt a rabbit could pull that off, but if it could, it probably would eventually, Guy speculated. They both finished their meal. Well then, sleeping isn't an option with that kamuckus going on tonight with the fight. Shall we go see it? Guy asked. You can go ahead. I'll stay up and make sure no one tries to do anything stupid to our house while some men are away at the moon court, Lily said. In scene 1. And that's basically all I have for you right now, other than notes. But,
no, you can't do that.
Well, I'm sorry. That's all I got.
No, you can't just stop and say we haven't got any more.
Well, that's it. Sorry, it's just an introduction. I have a lot more notes of what I'm going to write later on this weekend and publish.
You need to get pen to paper, Miles.
Yeah?
I would say so, yeah. I was just getting into it. That's why I said, you can't do that now.
Well, I guess that's a good sign.
I even went and got biscuits when you mentioned about porridge and lentils.
Boy, I think lentils are disgusting, but it's one of the most ancient legumes that was ever grown in the old world.
So yeah, got me, Miles, anyway. Got me. I was kind of slipping into it, definitely.
Well, the next part of it is basically going to be, there's going to be the fight, and the old man wins, but only just barely. He dies within about a year, and they end up having an expedition by this guy character to go and try to seek out domesticated animals in the southeast for rumors that they've heard of, and he goes on this big long adventure, and then he comes back and he fights his father to the death and gets married.
Oh, you don't have to read it us now then.
Well, you're not going to remember it all, and it's going to be drawn out with other things that I didn't mention.
Sounds good, Miles. I like the idea, man. I like the idea. Like I say, and definitely getting into it.
Cool. Yeah, I just like I said, it's just I just did that in one sitting a few days ago, and I was wondering, is this worth carrying on? So I figured I'd give it a little, trial run. But I also got to read another thing. That's Kurt Vonnegut's rules for writing. Kurt Vonnegut did Slaughterhouse-Five, Cat's Cradle, Sirens of Titan, Hocus Pocus, other books, American author. Anyway, he's dead now. So, but these 8 rules of writing are really funny. Rule number 1: use the time of a total stranger in a way that he or she will not feel the time was wasted. Number 2, give the reader at least one character he or she can root for. Number 3, every character should want something, even if it's only a glass of water. Number 4, every sentence must do one of 2 things: reveal character or advance the action. Number 5, start as close to the end as possible. Number 6, be a sadist. No matter how sweet and innocent your leading characters, make awful things happen to them, in order that the reader may see what they are made of. Number 7, write to please just one person. If you open a window and make love to the world, so to speak, your story will only get pneumonia. Number 8, give your readers as much information as possible, as soon as possible. To hell with suspense. Readers should have such complete understanding of what is going on, where, and why, that they could finish the story themselves should cockroaches eat the last few pages.
Yeah, I like the Miles. I like those as well.
I'm not actually gonna stick with the last one because I do have a lot of suspense.
And cockroach-proof paper.
Yeah, it's all on a hard drive.
So really, the last one doesn't count anymore in the modern day.
Well, I'll tell you right now, there's time travel, interdimensional reincarnated lives, and several different time periods and places in the world where the story is also going to take place.
So the character comes across psychotropic agents on his travels as well, then?
They're different reincarnations that he lives. And every life that he lives, he manages to do the same thing, which is create some great advancement for the betterment of mankind, but it ends up going wrong and everyone dies. That's why the name of the story is Retarded Prometheus. Prometheus is the god that brought fire from the gods to man and was punished for it. Well, this is a guy bringing fire from the gods to man, but he's fucking retarded, so he ends up like burning himself every time. That's the theme.
It sounds very familiar.
Yeah. But at one point there's going to be the earliest I'm going to go back is like a pre-Atlantean civilization about 100,000 years ago that's living off of an achievement from at least 100 or 250,000 years before that. And he ends up creating a black hole, killing himself, and sending himself into other lives. That he essentially all lives at different times simultaneously, and each time he screws up. Yeah.
Have you ever read Hitchhiker's Guide by Douglas Adams?
Of course I have.
Right, well, as you get through the books, I can't remember which book it is, but he meets this terrible creature that its teeth penetrate its face when it speaks. And it's been that's a reincarnation. It is Arthur Dent. I think it's Arthur Dent. He's run it over when it was a rabbit, and he squashed it when it was a fly, and yeah, it's its entire form is due to Arthur Dent repeatedly killing it throughout its multiple lifetimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this is similar to that.
My favourite part in that, I can't remember which book it is when they run off the edge of a cliff and realise that man can't fly because he expects to hit the ground.
Yeah. There is a great sense of humor in that, in all of those. I've only read the first one.
I listened to the first one on the radio.
Yeah. He makes a reference in the first Hitchhiker's Guidebook to Islamic terrorists hitting New York City, by the way.
Really? I missed that.
Yeah, I remember reading that thinking, wait a minute, when was this book written? Huh. How about that?
So
they're from the late 70s, aren't they?
Well, I mean, if Douglas got that right, I mean, if he did get it right,
telling you, I'll find it one of these days.
I'd imagine then, is it the Vogon construction fleet will turn up in about 35 minutes? I think it might be time to go down the pub and get some peanuts, Miles.
Yeah, a towel.
Oh, you can't go through life without knowing where your towel is, Miles. Now, that is a fact. Every man should know where his towel is.
Yeah. Never quite got that reference.
You don't. Well, it's when you're when you go.
I know, when you're traveling or
warp drive. Yes, yeah. Helps you restabilize your senses when you come out of warp drive. Of course, most people on it.
I think of a better towel joke reference. Was it Robert Schimmel was making this joke about sex? You know, it's like, oh wait, it's like, oh yeah, I'm about to come, and the girl's like, oh no, wait for me. It's like, well, you better hurry up. You've got about 3 seconds. Then it just happens, and it's, like a game show. Well, you didn't get to come, but tell her what we have, Jim. It's a towel.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's funnier.
Yeah, but the thing about the Douglas Adams and you've got to go through life knowing where your towel is, or you can't go through life not knowing where your towel is. There's just no reason for anyone to really know where the towel is. It really is. There's just, there is no sense in it at all. No.
Well, I'm going to know where my liker is before I know where anything else is.
What is quite strange, though, Miles, if you do...
Consider that much more important, because if I don't have the ability to make fire, I'm fucked.
If you do...
No, just like from a survival point of view. I don't mean because I smoke. Like if you can't make fire, you're screwed. I don't care, oh, look, I've got 100 cans of beans. Great, do you have a can opener, you schmuck?
Yeah, just another Douglas Adams reference. If you ask the majority of people, especially in the UK, what's the answer to the secret of the universe, the majority will answer 42. You see? Yeah, I mean, that is the actual answer.
There's gonna be 2 people I know that are gonna get that reference.
You'd be surprised. I would imagine that the majority of the people who listen to your show in the UK would actually get.
Well, yeah, in the UK they'll get it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's quite a cult following, I suppose. Works for Douglas Adams. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Restaurant at the End of the Universe, So Long and Thanks
When it comes to cult stuff like that, I still like my Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness.
Oh,
those are just classics.
Got to agree.
And shop smart, shop S smart.
Yes, I've got to agree, man. The most funniest horror movie that's ever been produced.
Well, I think I'm out of steam and we're about out of time, so I guess we'll call it.
Go on then, call it.
So, there you go. Yay, it's over. Start the ring. Welcome to the show.
What show is that?
Welcome to the show.
I'm trying to connect now.
Unable to connect. If you have an internet connection, go fuck yourself, because it doesn't matter.
To promote peace and harmony among nations. Being a new beginning for mankind. New beginning. New beginning. Finally, after all these years, what I have been telling the public about the healing abilities of these oils has all been proven to be true. Well, of course, I'm Rick Simpson, and this is the Dark City Radio Show. Dark City Radio Show. Dark City Radio Show. Dark City Radio Show. This is about the medicinal use of cannabis. Lately, we've been trying to get this thing going together in Spain, so people can come and get treatment, at the Compassion Club we hope to form. Dark City Radio's Compassion Club we hope to form. I had the pleasure of coming into contact with Paul Hayden and all the other great people he is working with at Dark City Radio. Compassion Club Week, to utilize this magnificent plant in every conceivable way. It will do much to promote peace and harmony among nations. Peace and harmony among nations. Being a new beginning for mankind. So I hope you will support our plan to build a better way of life that will give both mankind and this earth as we know it a future.